All right, what up? Welcome to an episode of Think Forward, the podcast where we help entrepreneurs build their business. I'm Jordan Shelton. I'm sitting here with
Lauren Wesley.
Cool. All right, let's get right into it. So this stat came across my desk and I was like, all right, we got to discuss this. 1 in 3 Americans started a side hustle in 2021 or said that they reported having one. So one, I think that's wild. Now, do you think that most of these side hustles were like people doing Uber, or do you think it was people starting businesses?
I wonder. I mean, I know for certain during the pandemic, there were a lot of deliveries. Since a lot of people couldn't do Uber, they were doing grocery deliveries or using Uber or those sorts of things in a different way. I wonder though. I mean, I think I definitely saw a few people doing candles or things on Etsy, making t-shirts were really big, especially drop shipping was a
Totally.
big thing during the pandemic.
Drop shipping had its moment. Yeah, it's interesting, and I say that because this podcast is going to be all about like when you should start your business and how to. And I think that that's one of the things I did want to just at least establish from the start is if you're listening to this and thinking about, hey, I want to like do a side hustle, really differentiating like, is this just a cash based side hustle, aka another job, Uber, bartending, waiting, etc., to get money in the door? Or is it like a building business side hustle, right? Okay, I'm starting a candle business. I'm doing freelance copywriting. I'm starting to build an agency, woodworking, or whatever it may be. So I think that's one of those things that anyone listening to be like, all right, where are my activities going around my full-time job? And are they going towards purely is it cash in the door, or am I looking to kind of build something that can replace my full-time job? You know what I mean? So some other stats I wanted to go through, which I kind of just want to go through these, and it's reasons that most Americans don't start a business. And this is from Zapier. So Zapier, however you pronounce it, they did a big research report on why people don't start businesses. I kind of want to go through each of these one by one and just like, I don't know, either call people out or talk or give our reasons as to why we think, people feel this way. So the number one reason, and I found this interesting, is people reported they didn't know how to get started. And that was 39% of people interviewed responded with they didn't know how to get started. I don't know about you. I think to me, that's kind of a cop out. Like, I think it's one of two things. I think one, like information is everywhere. You can literally Google start a business and find out in about 6 seconds how to do it. I think when people say they didn't know how to get started, what they're saying is, I'm waiting for the perfect idea. I don't have my passion isn't I can't see like I'm not drawn to anything. Like, you hear that type of stuff. What do you think when you hear that? The people like using that as an excuse. Which I'll put this one into like, okay, maybe we do this. There's excuses and valid reasons. I'm gonna throw this one in the excuse bucket. What about you?
I think starting a business for most, if you didn't come from or you hadn't done any prior research, I could definitely see how the idea of starting a business is just such a daunting task for a lot of people. I know it was for myself, and I think you're unsure, like, is it really as simple as doing a service for someone? Is it really as simple as designing a website or I don't know, yeah, freelance copywriting? Is it just finding someone? And I think the simplicity of it can be daunting. I think knowing that depending on who you ask advice from, they may say kind of lean into how scary it is or how you have to watch out or make sure you don't get sued or I think the uncertainty of it can be daunting and not knowing how to get started, even with Google available, you can ask Google anything. I don't know. I definitely have a bit of empathy for people in this space because
I think I just gonna call it like maybe they're not entrepreneurs. Maybe they're just like the idea of starting a business because I kind of think like every entrepreneur I've met has been a person who has found a way to like either they were doing like the soda can hustle in high school, or they tried doing bracelets, or they were trying to like sell service or promoted a bar, or like they always kind of had that in them. So look, I think being insecure about starting, like I can be empathetic towards that, but I think this like not knowing, they didn't know where to get started, that I don't buy as much. And I think it kind of goes into the second point, which is 33% 33% of people said they were worried about failing. So I think that's really the answer that the people in the last question are saying. They're scared they're going to fail, right? And
Right.
it comes back to what you said. When you talk with people, you go, I want to start a business, I want to start a restaurant, and people who've never owned a business before in their life will go, most restaurants failed. That's a bad business. And it's like, dude, last time I went around, I saw 100 restaurants open down the road. Yeah, all businesses are hard, right? So I think this fear, to me, this is not an excuse. This one kind of seems more valid, this fear of failure, which is, and what I mean by that is, this is something emotionally that entrepreneurs are going to have to work through their whole time they run a business. Um, is this imposter syndrome, thinking, hey, what if the worst case happens? Which is, so many people I talk with, they're on this like, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And they just start to spiral down like this staircase of worst case scenarios. And I'm like, what if it goes the other way? So I would say this, the worried about failing, really, this to me is I think the answer that the people who said they didn't know where to get started, like, I think the people who didn't know where to get started, like 1% of people truly didn't know what to do, or didn't have the resource, didn't have internet, didn't have Google. I think most people are actually worried of failing. What are your thoughts?
I guess this is tough because all of these are reasons why people don't start a business. I feel like as an entrepreneur, you kind of have to ask yourself the bigger picture question, which is what type of life do I want to live? What do I want my days to look like? You have to find that motivation of something that's bigger than the inertia of not starting a business. So, worried about failing, well, you could get fired from a job. Worried about or not knowing how to get started. I definitely agree that for the 1% of people who don't have access to the internet or don't have a library nearby, or for some reason they don't have access to the information. Okay, sure, I could see that, but then again, even just being around people, like for example, one of my aunts, she started babysitting as a side hustle, and it was just because she met my sister's neighbor, and they had just had a new baby, and the mom was talking about how she wanted to go back into work, and she didn't wasn't sure what to do with babysitting for the newest baby and her older kids too. And my aunt just sees the opportunity to say, oh, well, I can do that for you. I don't know, yeah, worried about failing.
But people, that's what it is. People aren't worried about failing when they take a job like babysitting or driving Uber, because there's like this established service they know they can offer. So I think for most people, they just have to take what's an established service you can offer, and go into there.
Mm.
So I'm going to run through a couple of these other ones here. We'll go through kind of these a little faster because they're kind of all, the next couple kind of bunch into one, which is 29% of people said they didn't have access to business tools. I think for an online business, that's a garbage excuse. I think if you were starting something like a woodworking business, that's a real valid excuse. If you're like, I need to save up for like a $5,000 saw or something, totally get it. So that one I would think is business dependent. The next, they weren't sure on how to work the tools or technology needed to run a business. That's such a vague reason. Like, there's a guy with a fruit cart down the road who sells fruit, who runs a business, and all he has is cash and fruit. So, like, I don't know the tools and technologies. That kind of seems like a cop out. All right, these ones I think are a little bit. These ones are valid, which is like they didn't have time. So to me, that bakes into one of two things: either they didn't make time, they're not prioritizing it. They're just saying like, I'm not prioritizing, or they truly are busy. That's 25% of people. The other people said 23% said they didn't have support from friends, family, or peers. Okay, I want to just jump in here and lead this one and then see what you say after. Is, if you support is nice from friends, family, and peers, but I'm going to tell you right now, that ain't going to carry your business 2 months after you start. So if that's the thing that's holding you back from starting your business, is like, my parents don't support it, welcome to be an entrepreneur. You have to be willing to be misunderstood, because those people ain't going to make your business go 1 year, 5 year, 10 years from now. So that to me is kind of like, not an excuse, but I think misguided. That's misguided reasoning. The only person who needs to believe in your business is you and the customers. Your friends and family don't. Would you agree or disagree on that one?
I think if you do choose to start a business, you choose a skill, or you recognize a skill in yourself or a skill that you have that can generate income. I think it kind of doesn't really matter what anyone else thinks. I agree, except for your customers. Is there someone who can pay you or who is willing to pay you? Do they have a need for what you're doing? I think I don't know about anyone. I don't know if you feel this way, but my family definitely had more traditional career paths as an ideal for me, whether that was working with the city or getting a job at anything that had stability that our parents were like, that's the thing.
I think that's what is we have to take on if you're going to be an entrepreneur and you're listening to this is like the willingness to be misunderstood. And that's just
Mhm.
part of the game. Now, this last one, 22% of people said they didn't have access to group plan benefits, aka health insurance. This is super valid. You have a family and you're like, hey, I need my health insurance. This is an American issue. If you're listening to this in Canada or Germany, that's probably not a big deterrent because you have healthcare. Yay. This one totally a valid thing. I would say this though, to those people who are using health insurance, I would still probably start a side hustle because if you get fired, you don't got that health insurance either. So I wouldn't rely on your job as Social Security. That's just kind of I think that's a bad strategy in general because ask anybody who got laid off from Netflix about their health insurance from Netflix, you know? So that to me, although valid, I would be starting to get a plan B going pretty quickly if that was my sole reason.
And I'll definitely say this about the benefits because that was something, I mean, when I first started my business, I went without healthcare for maybe 2 years as a younger person with no real pre-existing health issues or like not relatively healthy person. It was intimidating, definitely, to have to think about, okay, well, what if something happens? Like, oh, I wanted, there were things that I didn't do because just in case I would hurt myself, I wouldn't be able to cover. So I didn't buy rollerblades because what if you break a leg or something? I mean, there's definitely that concern. But I would say that once I started researching how to find your own healthcare, it's really not that hard to find it, and it can be relatively affordable.
I think if have a family, I get it. If you have a family with 3 kids, it's a pretty big leap, right? So
Yeah.
starting the side hustle might be the move. I want to move on to this next bit here, which is kind of like, okay, so we have all the reasons that, people don't, and we bucketed that. But now I want to talk about reasons people do. And particularly, I want to talk about the reasons why we started our separate businesses. So Lauren and I both have our own businesses in similar veins, but doing different things. What made you start your business? Was it something you always wanted to do? Did you have were you doing the soda can hustle? Did you have small businesses? And then kind of like, what led you to that moment where you're like, all right, it's time to go out on my own?
Historically, I was always the person who I guess I had been in the skill refinement phase for a while. When I was in college, I found opportunities to do things that I kind of were favors. I mean, for example, I designed a website for a local business who at the time, I was the head of philanthropy for my sorority, and there was this woman who would always do fundraisers for us and whatever organizations we were working with, she would gladly give us a fraction of a percentage of sales made during a certain window of time. And she never really, I mean, aside from making the money from sale of her product, she never really asked for anything. And I thought, well, after we did one of our philanthropies, I noticed her website was a little wonky and outdated. And so I just asked her if I could do it for her, which was free. I just wanted practice. I thought it was something that I could do. And then she said yes. She ended up paying me with like a couple dresses, which was awesome at the time because I didn't really have any money in college. And then from there, I just continued to find opportunities to refine that skill. So found a couple different people, started doing social media as interning, aka free labor. And then by the time I graduated college, I ended up getting normal fresh out of college jobs. So I worked as a receptionist, I worked at Home Depot, and on the side I was trying to figure out ways that I could continue to build on things. I started also doing jewelry making in school, tried to make that into a business, although I realized that the jewelry itself wasn't my main thing. It was more of the marketing of it and taking pictures of it that I really enjoyed. I had a couple businesses dwindle, candles, all of that, and then finally got a job in media as a receptionist, worked my way up to essentially producing commercials and things like that. And I realized that the track that I'd put myself on wasn't necessarily what I wanted to continue doing. and there was really no wiggle room to adjust my path in the industry to do something I wanted to do and something I was interested in, which was being creative and continuing to kind of make content.
It's one of those things. You said something super interesting there too, which is like you're like, you were experimenting, and then you
Yes.
realize now in hindsight, like, oh, I actually didn't love candle making. I love the promotion of candles.
Yes. I loved making the tags, decorating the containers.
And I say that because I think if someone's listening and they're like doing that and they realize they like one component of their current job or they really like one component of their hobby, that might be the path to monetization if they're looking at doing a business. I think that is so important. I also think we've seen this play out. You've seen it at your past gig where it's like, oh, a massive layoff comes in and people get their whole world shook. There's no other way to put it,
Mhm.
right?
Seeing that was really stressful at the company I was working for. They had a massive layoff. And you just realize that I think you idealize working for a company, and there are moments where you start to toe the line between job and family. And I think once you realize that you're not family, you're fairly dispensable. There are hundreds of people who can do what you do and are happy to take your gig or can have the ability to take your gig. It really shakes you and it makes you, well, for me, it made me want to take the reins on my future a bit more and realize that, okay, maybe I don't have to wait 5 more years until I can get the next promotion to make a livable wage in LA. Maybe I can do something else that can help me get there a bit faster. If I'm relying on myself to make sales and to find a client, one or two clients can really change your life depending on the type of business that you're doing. So for me, social media marketing. But yeah, it was all about kind of taking the reins.
It's one of those things like Mark Cuban has that great quote where he's like, I don't care if the glass is half full or half empty. I just care that I'm pouring the water. And I've always thought of that one like, okay, I'm in control. Even if we're going down, at least it's like I directed the ship down and I can take ownership for that. Not,
Hmm.
I don't want to be in a position where I think I'm doing a great job. I walk in one day and I get laid off. That to me is
Yep.
terrifying. Um,
Hmm.
but I get that that's a real thing, right? Especially in a lot of the companies and in spaces we work in around tech. For me, and like starting my business, it was interesting. I was in my last year of college, and I was like, thinking of going to law school or going to get my MBA or whatever. I just kind of like looked at a couple of my friends who had graduated and were in law school, who were articling, and some people are out of it, and I was like, whoa, okay, that career, if I get into it, although this is a traditionally quote unquote safe career and I probably make a lot of money, they work a lot, like working a lot, and they start at the bottom of the rung. So, oh, I got to wait 40 years to one, have the experience, but two, get the money funnels up in the Indian law, right? Where it's like, okay, to the partners, like, what does my partner track look like? And when would I get there? And how I'm gonna have to grind at the bottom. And I'm not against hard work, but I'm like, are there any industries out there where it's reversed and I have the advantage over people in their 50s and 60s, right? Let me think about that. What's a high value skill that I could do that I know, or I have more experience with than maybe people getting into it now? And that, yeah, it was social media. At that time, it was Facebook. And I said, okay, well, I was literally in that first group of Facebook university kids in 2005 or whatever, 2006. Okay, I've been doing social media and doing this like understanding using the internet like thousands of more hours than people in their 40s and 50s. Okay, this is a competitive advantage I have. I thought, well, heck, I could do something. So then I went and I learned everything I could about social media marketing and SEO. And I was like, all right, this stuff is like evolving and new and takes an internet connection. I think I can get paid for this. Just kind of flipping that. And I think that was really useful for me to go, okay, where's something where I have the advantage over people who are maybe older, and then how can I sell that? So that's what started it for me, and now we're in year 11 of the business. So it worked out okay, or worked out okay enough to keep food on the table. You know what I mean? All right, so we've talked about like why people didn't start businesses. We talked about what led to us starting our businesses. I want to talk about here kind of more generally, like when should people start a business? What are those cues and what does it look like? I know both of us went all in, right? You left your job. I was in school. Well, I guess I didn't go all in. I was bartending while doing it. But do you go all in or do you stay at your career and try to build up a business on the side? I think that's up to you and you got to look at your own financial situation. And I usually like that route, but I want to go through a couple reasons and, reasons we might say or suggest to people like, hey, you should start a business. So, is there anything that jumps out to you and you're like, okay, person A comes to you and they're like, Lauren, I'm thinking about starting a business. And then you're going to tell them, all right, well, you should, because blank. Are there any reasons that kind of pop out for you that you would suggest people to start a business for?
For me, it was definitely an observation that something I'd been looking at for a while. I had gotten into a career path. I was working my way up to try and get to executive producer, whatever I was thinking I wanted at that time. And I just remember looking around because I started from the bottom. So I got to know everyone as a receptionist. I got to know pretty much everyone at the company, at least by name. Sometimes their family would call in. So I knew quite a bit about people and who worked at the company. And I just remember looking around and thinking, okay, what do I want out of my life? Realizing, okay, for me, what's important? I want to be able to go pick up my kids from school when I have kids. I want to, if there's an emergency with my family, I want to be able to have a flexible schedule so that I can go to the hospital if something happens, which while I was working there, a couple things did happen that some jobs you can't just leave. Some jobs it's a little more complicated than that. I think I also looked around and I realized, okay, the people who were in the position that I was looking to be in one day, how happy do they look? How do they get to spend time with their families? How much autonomy do they have? Just kind of looking around and seeing, is this something that I could picture myself in and would I be happy if I were there? I think once I realized that wasn't for me, it kind of happened little by little, but I just remembered thinking life is too short to be this stressed. Everyone who had a higher position of power seemed really stressed all the time. And I just thought, I run a little stressed generally. I just knew that that wasn't something that
Wasn't
was going to
serving.
work for me.
The interesting part, right? Is just recognizing like, okay, I'm busting my ass for this company and I'm stressed out and they could come in and lay me off tomorrow. And it's just business. We got to remember this with these companies. They're not your family. Any business that says your family, you start feeling like, oh, just come in on the weekend. No, boundaries, baby. You need to be in control. And what I mean by that is a lot of jobs do give you control. Hey, work autonomously, get your stuff done. That's a great job, right? That's a company that has entrepreneurial spirit inside of it. I think what you said there is having flexibility, right, was important for you, having time flexibility. I think other people, look, if you feel like you're on shaky footing at work or you start to feel like, hey, this company is going downward, I don't believe in the product, probably a good time to either start a business or start looking for another gig. I think, too, anybody who's like, I have extra time. You're single and you work your 9 to 5, and then you're like, okay, I got a couple hours every night. I could try to do something. I also think you can start a business if you like just need money. In high cost of living cities, LA, New York, it's the sad but real truth. Like people need money. Like you just, it's that's part of it. And then I think the last one, which I tell people, is like because there's a million reasons to start a business, you can find a million reasons not to. I think ultimately you need to break down things into hobbies, side hustles, business. Is it a hobby? Right. I love football. I love quarterback. I'm not about to go start quarterback coaching for money. That's just not happening. I might go coach a team. Is it a side hustle? Right. Is it I'm going to make bracelets and sell them outside of my job or candles? Okay, cool. Or is it something I eventually want to be my full-time gig, right? Do I want to go all in and actually have like candles be something that can replace my job? What I usually will recommend to people too is start if you can also start something as a side hustle business and then grow it into your full-time business once it gets to like, 60 or 70% of your current wage, then make the jump. That would be where I would go. Now, I do want to kind of like before we close this out, just give people who are like thinking, they're listening, they're like, okay, well, shit, I want to start a business. I want to go through just some like some ideas and profitable things that we've seen people do. So just a couple ideas. One, we have some friends and they have started a book binding business. What they do basically is they take books, they will make them leather bound, and then they sell them on Etsy. Their whole business is run on Etsy. They've been able to replace one of their salaries already. They both work in it. The business probably on track to do multiple six-figure from bookbinding. And to me, like, I don't know about you, but when I hear ideas like that, I'm like, I love how niche down it is. And that not every business idea has to be $1 billion idea. $180,000 idea or 200,000 or whatever they're going to make. That's an awesome idea too. Are there any ideas that you've heard or that have popped out to you that you've seen people do, like little niche businesses that have been interesting?
I think my favorite one I've seen recently was actually while I was scrolling through Airbnb experiences, and people do these pop up picnics, and they're these beautiful setups, and they just create this little environment for you. They'll get charcuterie plates or whatever, drinks, and they just create a really nice experience. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty fun business. Get to make people happy. They get to spend time on the beach, have a little picnic. That's awesome.
That's actually a really interesting thing too there. I want to talk a little bit before we close this out on Airbnb experience. That is a hack to get clients and get money in the door. When you start a business, you need money in the door. Sometimes people will be like, well, I don't want to give a cut to Airbnb. And here's what I would say to you. You can sell oranges on the side of the highway, or you can sell them in Walmart. Walmart gets a cut, right? And where do people go and buy oranges? They buy them at Walmart. Okay. It's the same thing with services and travel experiences. Pay the cut to Airbnb, get money in the door, or use a service like Handy, right? If you want to maybe say you're starting a janitorial service, go on Handy, get a client base, and you can move people off Handy afterwards, but really start to build your rep there. So I love those for two kind of oddball ideas. Do an experience on Airbnb, or look for something super niche where you can take a product like books, what have you, and create something around. It could be custom signage, could be custom design for people, whatever it may be. I love both of those. Yeah, I think this is a good first episode. Good if we ended there.
Definitely, yeah. And if anyone has an example of a business or wants to just ask us, should they start their business, and send over their idea, I'd love to hear and maybe chat on that next time.
100%. And if y'all want more episodes or anything, just go to hyclass.co. That's hyclass.co. We have free resources. We got a newsletter there. We're going to have more podcasts coming. This has been the first episode of Think Forward, and we're your hosts, Jordan Shelton, Lauren Wesley.